No applause. And yeah. I always want to get it before I preach, then because afterwards you might not get any. So there you go. It's always good to know. I worked at a therapeutic boarding school for high school age boys for 9 years. And these guys came from all over the United States, and they were all like 14 to 17. If you turned 18, you could stay only if you were going to graduate. But these guys were the masters of manipulation. And that was one of the reasons why they were there. And it's one of those schools where they wake up in the middle of the night and there's two big dudes in their room, and the parents are in the hallway crying with their luggage packed. And they end up getting on a plane and flying to Redmond and ended up in Sisters, Oregon. And so it's one of those kind of crazy things. They're not happy to be there. And so to these guys, if you told them no, to them, how they heard that is this: so you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah, that's exactly what they thought no meant. And I learned very quickly to use this phrase. I used it all the time when I worked there. I don't use it as much now, but feel free to use it. And a lot of you have heard this before. And the phrase is, what part of no don't you understand? I also found out that was a country western song, which I didn't know. But everything's a country western song, right? So it wasn't that big a deal. But, they would come up to me, and eventually I know kids that would always come up to me, and every time they came up to me, they always had a question, always wanted to do something. And they'd walk up to me, and I'd just look at them and go, no. That's just how I would respond. And I found this to be true, and you can use this as a parent. I'll just give you some wisdom of old age. Ready for this? It's much easier to change a no to a yes than a yes to a no. So if you say no, and then you think about it, and you go, well, I guess it's not that big a deal, and I guess it'll work out, you can go. That's way easier than going, yes, you can go, and then coming back going, I've been thinking about this, and I don't think you can go now. Whoa. Then fight's on, right? So I'll just throw that out there, just a little bit of advice. Well, here at Compass, a lot of people are visiting today. Thanks, guys, for singing. That was awesome. Thanks for bringing all your family. Yeah, because we have 30 of our ladies are gone, and that meant that how many guys whose wife went there are here today? Let me see your hand. There's a star in your crown for that. How many of you have kids? Yeah, just one. Oh, two. Okay, three. Yeah. Well, they're a little older, but yeah. So anyway, we've been studying through the book of Nehemiah here at Compass. And so if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn there to Nehemiah chapter 6, chapter 6, and we're going to look at 6 and 7. In our study of Nehemiah this morning, we're going to look at the power to say no. Nehemiah had been commissioned, if you know the backstory, by his king, the king of Persia, to go back to his hometown of Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls in the city. And the king was so much behind him that he gave him papers to travel so he could travel from one country to the next and get through all the way back to Jerusalem. The king also gave him papers so when he needed any supplies, he could go and get the supplies to rebuild the wall. But when he got back there, he found that not everything in Jerusalem was hunky-dory. How many of you know what hunky-dory means? Okay, some of you don't, I know. Yeah, is it? It just means okay. I could have said that, I know, but I thought I'd throw that word out because it's a cool word. But like any project, when he got back to Jerusalem, there were blockers. And their names were Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And they show up in chapter 2 of Nehemiah. We've already looked at that. They show up again in chapter 4. And then we're going to see them again in chapter 6. And these guys, our family, something that we did when our kids were growing up, especially for our daughter Katie, was if there was somebody bad in a movie, we called them Bad Bob. And so Katie would go like, is that guy Bad Bob? Yeah, that means they're bad. And these guys are Bad Bobs. And these guys show up all the way through the book trying to stop Nehemiah and the vision that God had given to him. So in chapters 6 and 7 in our study today, remember the theme of Nehemiah we've been looking at is accomplishing God's vision for your life. And all of us know that God puts visions in our heart. God puts burdens in our heart to do something or to meet with somebody or to go do this, or to go do that. And what do we do with that? What do we do with that burden? What do we do with that passion? What do we do with that vision? If we don't act on it, it slowly goes away. But when we had it, it was burning in our soul. And Nehemiah is somebody who God gave a vision to. And he dwelt on it, he meditated on it, he cried about it, and then he did something about it. And that's what we've been looking at through our study. So today in our study, Nehemiah is going to demonstrate for us, and he's going to show us a simple principle in life. And this principle, I believe, is a game changer. This principle is one that you can use in your Christian life. We can use it in our marriage, in our family, in our work, and in our parenting. It's a very simple principle, but I found it to be so true. And the principle is this. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. When you set a priority in your life, to keep it, you got to be able to say no. For example, 20 years ago, maybe longer, Kath decided, my wife, that, hey, we just don't see each other that much. And so we decided that on Friday, we were going to go to lunch every Friday. That was when our kids were in school. And so we would go to lunch every Friday, and we called it our date night. Well, it was date day then, but it was Friday during the day. And then as our kids got older, then it became date night, and it was Friday night we'd go out to dinner. And every Friday night, we would try to go out and do something together. And you know what I found out? That became a priority in my life. I realized I needed to do this. I need for this to happen. I realized how that for me to keep that priority, I had to say no. Friends call you up, hey, Jones, let's go fishing. When are we going? Friday. What time do you want to get back? I don't know. We'll fish till dark. Sorry. I can't do it. If you want to get back by 3, it's great. I'll go with you. But if we got to be later than that, I can't go. And I found myself having to say no over and over and over again. Because if I didn't say no, and I went, then was that really a priority in my life? And so keep that in mind. We're going to go over this, and we're going to see it in Nehemiah's experience today in chapter 6, how he had to say no over and over and over again in order to guard his priorities. So there's several strategies that Nehemiah's enemies brought against him, and we're going to look at that, and we're going to see that the power to say no is the guardian of priorities. The first one is this. You have to say no to distractions. There in chapter 6, follow along with me, starting in verse 1. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies hear that I built the wall and there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors in the gate, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me saying, come, let us meet together at, you see that word right there? Let's just say Starbucks, okay? I could butcher that word and you wouldn't know any better, and you could say, well, that's how you say it. But I didn't even know where to start on that word. So we'll just say that, hey, let's meet at Starbucks. We all know what that is, so that makes it simpler. In the plain of Ono. And Ono's hilarious. When I said Ono, you know what I thought about? I have to be honest. Those of you who go to Compass, it's Truett Schilling. And the reason Ono is such a big word is every time the Seahawks are playing, I'm a diehard Seahawk fan for those of you that are visiting, and Geno Smith was our quarterback, every time he threw an interception, my phone would buzz, and it'd be Truett saying, oh no, Geno. And that's how I get. So when I studied this and I could see oh no, all I could think about was Truett, how he messed up my mind. And I couldn't concentrate. And he watches our sermons now and then, so Truett, I blame you for this. And then he says this, but they intended to do me harm. Their strategy was really simple. It was this. Their strategy was to get Nehemiah to focus off of his priority to finish the wall and to spend time meeting with them at Starbucks. It's interesting that if you study where Nehemiah was at in Jerusalem and where this place was in the plain of Ono, it was a day to get there and a day to get back. So if he took a whole day to travel and then he spent a day with them and then he comes back, that's 3 days. And Nehemiah said, I can't do it. I have a priority to get this job done, and I'm sticking to it. so he said no. So his invitation to meet for coffee was no. You say, why is that? Hey, me stopping for 3 days is going to put us behind. Plus, I know this is risky business going there. Verse 4 is an interesting verse. We won't read it. But basically, Sanballat invites him 4 times, and Nehemiah 4 times sent back the same response. Hey, come meet with us. No. 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 They hammered away at him, and every time he had made up his mind, the answer is no, I'm not coming. I'm not going there. Here's something I want you to think about. Show me how you spend your time, and I will show you what your priorities are in your life. No doubt about that. You know, time and money aren't the same. Why? Because with time, we all have the same amount. That's not true of money, right? But all of us have exactly the same amount. 24 hours in a day, 186 hours in a week, 730 hours in a month, and 8,760 hours in a year. We all have exactly the same amount of time. But if we don't have the power to say no on our priorities in life, you can get distracted because of lack of time. There's a guy who plays in the NFL. His name's Travis Kelce, and he's a tight end. He's one of the best in the business, and he's won a couple Super Bowls. And some people think that he's been distracted this year, and I don't know why. You know, he's on every commercial, you know, and he's doing all of these things. He has a podcast with his brother. He's got all of these outside activities, and seriously, it's true. His production on the field is not what it was like the year before. And I have no problem with that. I'll amen with that. I'm not a huge fan, right? But I think this is true. Distractions lead to defeat. Look at it this way. If we say the number one priority in our life is God, then do we guard the time we need to make that happen? Most of us as believers, we know the right answer. Who's number one in your life? Yeah, exactly. That's what we would say. But is that really true? Did we see that? Grant always has the right answer. You know, I can always trust him to let it fly. But do we guard Sunday morning at 10 o'clock? Do we guard our home group or our Bible study that we're involved in, where nothing else, unless we're sick or something major happens, that we're not going to go there? Because I know how it is. I mean, people ask me, hey, you want to go fishing on Sunday? And I can say, no, I have to work. I mean, that's my excuse. But you know what it is? It's people always are asking. Things always come up. Things are always trying to get. And you know that if it's really important to you, you'll say no. If your kid's doing something, you got a game or something like that, and somebody calls you and you'll go, no, I can't, man. I got this. But how many times do we do that on Sunday morning at 10 when we basically can allow anything to take that spot? And yet we'll say, God's number one in my life. See, I wonder about that. I know that if I didn't have to go to church because I get paid to go to church, and this is my job to go to church, I know what it's like not to be involved in ministry, and I know how easy it is not to go. And COVID made it that much easier for people. I totally get that. But the point is this. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. Hey, there's an old saying. My parents used it on me when I was growing up. It said, idle hands are the devil's playground. Remember that? Such a classic saying. I'm going to give you a new one. It's called this. Busy hands are the devil's excuse. We as parents have to guard our kids' time. We have to guard their priorities for them. God gave us that responsibility as parents. And that means we can overbook our kids. We think they got to be this and they got to this. But you got to sit down and say, these are the priorities for my kids. Their spiritual life is my number one priority. I want to see them come to faith and have a relationship with Christ. I want them to have a good education so that they can have things to do. And they need that in our society that we live in. And whatever those priorities might be, you would list those out. And then you got to look at their life and say, Am I allowing them to fulfill those priorities, or am I allowing so many things to interfere in their life? They have so much going on in their life that those things are not really the priorities of their life. We have a responsibility for that. God has given to us. We're their parents, because they don't have the ability to say no. We're the ones who sign them up. We're the ones who pay for it. And so that's something I think we need to think through. We need to say no to distractions. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. Number 2, we need to say no to distractions. Secondly, we need to say no to discouragement. Verse 5, look what he says. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servants to me with an open letter in hand. Now, there's an open letter and there's a closed letter. A closed letter was rolled up, remember? And they would put wax on it, and they would take their ring and put a signet on it, and only the person that it was addressed to could open it up. But an open letter was one that was just open, and everybody could read it that passed it along. So this letter was meant to be a smear campaign on Nehemiah. Look what it says in verse 6. And it was written, "It is reported among the nations," in Geshem also says it, "that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have all set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together." Sanballat started this huge campaign of misinformation. I've never seen that before, have you? If you're like me, I can't wait for Tuesday to get over. I mean, hear this commercial, and they're fighting each other, and they smear them, and it goes both ways. And you're sitting there going, what is the truth? I don't even know. And then you go, I don't care. And then if you didn't get mailers, you wouldn't get any mail at all. You know what I'm saying? I'm just going like, wow. Man, just give me the money it costs for that and take me out to dinner. This is crazy. But that's what was going on to Nehemiah. And again, Nehemiah's response is so awesome. Then I sent to him, saying, "No such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind." For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from work, and it will not be done. Their strategy was really simple, was to make Nehemiah afraid and intimidated, so he would stop work. You know, fear leads to a discouragement, and we lose motivation when we get discouraged. Say no to discouragement. When I was in high school, I know you find this hard to believe, I played basketball in high school. 5'8" kid, right? And I played at a big high school, North Eugene High School over in the valley, and when I went to school there, it was a powerhouse in basketball. And so I showed up, and I get there, and I'm a sophomore, and I make the sophomore team. In those days, only a 3-year high school. You had a sophomore team, a JV team, and a varsity team. So my sophomore year, I played on the sophomore team. And the next year, I was going to try out again. I knew I wasn't going to make the varsity team. My only hope was to make the JV team as a junior. And they only kept like 2 or 3 juniors. I knew that. And so I decided, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to try out. And the reason I wasn't going to try out was because I was afraid. Fear just entered into my heart. And I got discouraged. And I said to myself, Jones, man, if you try out, you're going to get cut. And in our high school, they put the cut list on the door of the locker room the day after the cuts were made, right? And you got to school, everybody's gathered around to see who made it and who got cut. And the thought of being there and not seeing my name on there, that drove me crazy too. I'd be embarrassed with that. And so I made up my mind I wasn't going to do it. And then I started to talk to myself. And I gave myself this pep talk. I basically said, if you don't try, you're going to hate yourself, you big wuss. I looked up wuss. It just means that you're basically a coward or a wimp. And I realized that if I look back on my life, if I went to a JV game and I'm sitting in the stands and those guys are playing and I never tried, I would hate myself for that, for not at least giving it my best effort. So I tried and I made it. Praise God, right? I look back on that. But I just remember how nerve-wracking that was. And I remember how the fear of failure almost kept me from doing it, from trying out. And I think about this saying, the power to say no is the guardian of priorities. Fear will hold us back from what God wants us to do in our life. Have you ever thought about this? Why do you think that God told Abraham and Moses and Joshua and Gideon and Samuel and Elijah and Daniel and Mary and Joseph and John and Paul, and in Revelation 2:10 he told the church in Smyrna, do not be afraid? Why do you think he told all those people not to be afraid? Because he knew that fear would what? Hold us back. We got to say no to fear. Say no to it. Say no to discouragement. I love Nehemiah here because he's the king of the short prayer. Verse 9 he says, but now, O God, strengthen my hands. In other words, he's saying, God, give me the power to say no to fear. So we see, hey, say no to distractions, say no to discouragement. Also, he goes on and he says, hey, say no to deception. Verses 10 through 14. Verse 10 tells us that Nehemiah goes to the home of Delaiah, who is a prophet. And the prophet says to him, look what he says, verse 10. Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night. It goes from bad to worse. At first they were just wanting to harm him. Now they want to what? Kill him. That's what it says. But Nehemiah's response, again, is so awesome. Look what he says, verse 11. But I said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. Their strategy was simple. They wanted Nehemiah to do this. They wanted him to go into the temple because, first of all, Nehemiah knew this, that these prophets were not from God, but they were hired by Tobiah and Sanballat to falsely prophesy. In other words, you had prophets for hire, pastors trying to get rich off of other people. That doesn't happen today. That's supposed to be a joke. And number two, he knew that they were trying to make him afraid, so he would go and hide in the temple. Thirdly, he knew that he was not a Levite. And he knew that if he went into the temple, into the holy place, it would be a sin against God. Matter of fact, he probably knew Numbers 18:7 that says, if you go into the holy place and you're not a priest, you will die. And they would take your life. Matter of fact, he probably heard the story of King Uzziah, who escaped into there. He escaped from the holy place with his life, but he ended up with leprosy. So it was nothing to mess with. And fourthly, he knew that their ultimate goal was to give him a bad name and ruin his reputation so they could taunt him. And that's before social media. They just wanted to taunt him. So the bottom line is this. Think about this. Satan is the master of deception. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, he disguises himself as an angel of light. We always think of Satan as the angel of darkness, don't we? But he's not. He's the angel of light. He disguises himself as something that's good, something that's profitable. He's doing anything to get your eyes off of God and off of Jesus and off of him being the only way to have eternal life and get to heaven. Whatever he can do to deceive you, he will definitely try. A guy that I knew had a Michael Jordan rookie card. He got it from a friend. And if you look up a Michael Jordan rookie card, you will find that they go anywhere from like $500 to like, I think one was sold for $1 million. They go like $250,000. And he had this Michael Jordan rookie card in mint condition. And he decided that this last year, he just told me about it like a couple weeks ago, there's a place you can send it to that will tell you the validity of your card. So he packages it all up, certified mail, sends it to these people. And these people, they go through and they examine your card. And it came back that this card was what? False. It was a fake card. So this card was worth nothing. He thought it was worth a couple $1,000. But it ended up being false. The only good thing was that he didn't pay for it. That would have been discouraging, wouldn't it? Hey, I bought a Jordan card for $10,000. Wow. But man, it's worth $500,000. Okay, and then you find out it's all fake. He found out that it was fake. Obadiah 1:3. Obadiah is a book you don't read very often. Maybe you've never read it. It's only one chapter. But Obadiah is a great book because Obadiah, the prophet of God, speaks against the Edomites. And maybe you don't know much about them, but they built Petra. And you've seen Petra, the narrow place where they filmed Indiana Jones, right? And it's there, and you have to go through like a place that's 30 feet wide to get there. And the Edomites could hide in Petra and thought nobody could ever conquer us because nobody could get through there to get to them. 100 people could hold off 1,000 people with no problem in Petra. And the Edomites were arrogant people. And Obadiah says this, the pride of your heart has deceived you. In other words, God sent some people in there that took out the Edomites. But how many of us has failed because we thought we could handle it? Because when Satan deceived us into thinking that we were strong enough to play right on the fence of something that would be sinful in our life, and eventually it took over us. I heard a sad story about a guy I know who left his wife and 2 kids for another lady that had 4 kids. Not sure what kind of trade that was. It's the saddest thing ever. We know these people and they're dear friends. And it's so sad. But when it first started with him, it was a deception. He thought he could be friends with this person and it wouldn't affect his life. And then eventually one thing led to another, led to another, and led to another. And without the ability and the power to say, what? No, this is wrong. I got to turn and go a different direction. The pride of your heart has deceived you. I love verse 14. Nehemiah's prayer there is so great. And this is something for us to think through because today we don't hear much about this, but this prayer is awesome. Look what he says. He says to God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, according to these things that they did. And also the prophets Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. In other words, he doesn't pray for mercy. He prays for what? Justice. He says, God, remember what they did. Remember what they did. So when you are the one who heaps out justice, you'll remember that. He doesn't pray for mercy. He prays for justice. Never be afraid to pray for justice. We always quote, and I'm not saying these are wrong, we always quote like Stephen who said, hey, Father, forgive them as he's being stoned. And we all know what Jesus said on the cross. Father, forgive them for they don't know what they do. So when people do evil to us and people maybe do evil to our family, we're always thinking, man, I got to be like the people who can just totally forgive. And forgiveness is a way to get rid of bitterness, and I totally get all of that. But don't ever be ashamed or wrong to pray, God, judge those people according to what they've done. Because he is going to do that. If you want to see justice, read Revelation 20. And you see that people stand before God, and the books are opened, and they're judged according to what is in the books. God has recorded everything that they have ever done that's wrong, and they will receive justice for that. And God is the perfect judge. That's why in Romans 12:19, we don't quote this very often, but look what Paul said. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Remember, his justice is perfect and ours is not. And that's why he says, don't take your own revenge. Allow God to do it. Allow me to do it. Because we would either be too easy or too hard. But God's justice is always what? Perfect. Because that's who God is. That's a part of his character. So say no to deception. I know it's not a good sermon if you have 4 points, but I couldn't help it. I had the whole chapter. So say no to distractions, say no to discouragement, say no to deception. And then fourthly, say no to deferring. Now, deferring is kind of a weird word. I understand that. And the word defer literally means to do it later. To do it at a later time. Like in football, we see it all the time. When they flip the coin at the beginning of the game, whoever wins the flip gets to decide when do they want the ball. And they can have it then at the opening kickoff, or they can get it what? At the kickoff at the end of when the second half starts. And most teams what? Defer. That's what they say. Which means we don't want it now. We're going to wait and get it later. But in Nehemiah's situation here, and we'll see how this finishes out, he had to say no to deferring. Nehemiah and his crew finished the wall. Look at verse 15. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. Think about it. Mission impossible became mission possible. Took them 52 days to build the wall around Jerusalem. That is amazing. Totally a God thing, right? God was totally in all of this. And if you remember in chapter 2 of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah went there, when Nehemiah thought about Israel, he thought about Jerusalem, he thought about the walls torn down, he also thought about how all the pagan nations around there laughed at Israel because of their wall. And he basically said, we're an embarrassment. We're a disgrace because the wall to our great city is torn down. But look what he says here in verse 16. He says, and when all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own estimation. Isn't that a great thing? They thought of themselves really high until that happened. And then their view of themselves, whoa, we're not so mighty after all. For they perceived that his work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Their perception was true. Hey, here's a little tip on witnessing. You know, I know how hard it is to witness sometimes, and here's a little tip on witnessing, and here it is. Whenever you accomplish something, don't forget to give God the glory. Whenever you get blessed, or maybe you get protected from something, and you're telling somebody your story about what happened to you, it's a great opportunity to tell them that deep down inside you believe what? God watched over me. A lot of you that are visiting, they don't know. My wife, we went to a game at Austin, right? A football game. We're on the 92nd row at Austin, and she falls backwards down the stairs on the concrete. Broke her nose, got 2 black eyes, and she heard a voice that said, curl up, and she's 5 foot on a good day. And she rolls down there, and this big hand reached out. Some dude sitting there just grabbed her as she was going by and stopped her. And she was upside down when he stopped her, and he picked her up and sat her down, got behind her, held her neck up until the aid people could get there, and said, I'm not leaving until they come. And Kathy, when she tells that story, and at work, people are looking at her like, hey, like, they're afraid to ask her, like, what happened to you? You know what I'm saying? Somebody thought she had like a face job and it went bad. You know, it was like, whoa, okay. Yes. But you know what she said? I'll tell you what happened. God watched over me. Could have broke my neck, could have got a concussion. All the things that would have, could have, should have happened didn't happen. And when Kathy's telling her story, no matter who she's telling it, she always throws in, hey, my God was watching over me. And we all have those opportunities to when we have a chance to say a word, when God has done something, God has blessed us to give glory to him. We have a lot of students here today, and you have all kinds of opportunities at school to do that. All times. To be a witness. You don't have to preach at anybody or do anything. You just have to show what's important to you. I just remember, like, my son played football at Ben High, and his junior year, he would run out, you know, like at the beginning of the game, and him and 2 other kids would run into the end zone, kneel down and pray before the game, ask God to help them do their best, right? And it's really funny. The 3 guys that went, all of them, their dads were pastors. So I think there's pressure there. I don't know. The next year when he was a senior, half the team went down and prayed together. And that was the influence of all these other guys on the team who were all believers. And other guys decided they were going to take a stand about what they believed in. It was a small thing, but it's what? It's a testimony of your faith in God and that God's first in your life. And so that's all that is happening here, is Nehemiah realized that by building the wall, it was a testimony to all the non-believers, all of the pagan countries around, that Israel had a God, and their God was alive. And then poor Nehemiah, we will look at this in 17 and 18. Tobiah, bad Bob, is at it again. Okay, he doesn't give up. But we're going to now have to go through chapter 7, and you're going like, oh my gosh, is this guy ever going to get quiet? No, I'm not. But in chapter 7, in verses 1 to 4, there's kind of some finishing touches on the project. It says that he set the doors in place, and he put the guards in place and told them the hours they were going to open up for business and the hours that they were going to shut it down. I thought about this. How do you think Nehemiah felt after 52 days of working on this huge project, all the stress he was under from trying to get the project done, all these people, and then all the negativity that was attacked upon him in his personal life. How do you think he felt about all that? I think he was probably what? Exhausted. Just tired. And thankful that it was over. I found it interesting, but I read an article that said researchers tell us that 20% of the pastors who lead their church through building programs will leave within 2 years after its completion. For all various kinds of reasons. But one of them, they just get burned out. It's so much work to raise all of this money and to answer all these questions and all these people, and everybody's got their opinion of what color the carpet ought to be, right? You know how that goes. It can be a total nightmare to be in charge of an all-volunteer organization that's trying to do something where everybody thinks they have a point or an opinion or an idea. And to me, that would have been Nehemiah. But I want you to notice verse 5, what happens to Nehemiah. Then my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up at first, and I found written in it. Do you realize what Nehemiah had just been told? God put another thing on his heart. My reaction would have been, God, that wasn't in my original contract. I didn't sign up for this. I want to defer. I'm going to give somebody else a chance. I don't want to hog all the glory, God, so get somebody else to do this. Similar to Moses, remember at the burning bush? One excuse after another, and finally he just had to come out and say, I don't want to do it. I should have got there to begin with. But that's Nehemiah. God gives him another huge project to do. And what does Nehemiah do? He says, no. No to what? I'm not going to defer it. I'm going to do it. God, I'm going to do what you want me to do. And in chapter 7, verses 6 through 73, you can read through. I was going to ask if somebody wanted to read that out loud, right? Wouldn't that just be the worst torture? You're in a small group. Hey, somebody read chapter 7. I'll do it. And you're so innocent. And you look up there and it's like every word known to Hebrew, right? That you don't have a clue. And you read through this huge genealogy of all of these people. And it said that people came back. Remember, 40 years before that, Zerubbabel took a group of people back to rebuild the temple. And so 40 years later now, Nehemiah goes back with a huge group of people. And so that's who he's talking about there. And so here's what Nehemiah does in chapter 7. He organizes 49,942 people on what they needed to do in Jerusalem. In other words, first of all, they needed to know who's from the tribe of Levi. So they get all those people organized. They organized all the singers and all the musicians and all the people that are going to lead in this huge worship service that was going to take place. They also had people who what? No one lived in Jerusalem. It was kind of empty. That was their land. That was where they were supposed to live. So they organized those people to live there. There's other people that were organized to live outside of Jerusalem. And he puts all those people in their place. He organizes 49,000 people to be in the right spot. All to do what? Well, we'll talk about that next week when Matt gets back, chapter 8. They're going to have a big worship and revival service with Ezra. And that's what Nehemiah does. So when God told him to do it, he didn't put it off. So Matt's going to talk about that in the next Sunday. You know, I thought about this, and this is just me, but I thought about this. I'm going to do this. It's one of the things I'm going to do. I'm going to start trying to call Sunday the Lord's Day. Because Revelation 1:10, you ladies that are in Revelation in Bible Study Fellowship, John says, I was in the Spirit on what? The Lord's Day. What's the Lord's Day? Sunday. The day of the resurrection. They called it the Lord's Day. Somehow I got a feeling that if we would call Sunday the Lord's Day, it would help to remind us that it's a priority in our life. This day is the Lord's Day. One day a week I should be able to give to Him. It's His day. Why do we meet on Sunday, not on Saturday, the Sabbath? Because Sunday is the day of what? The resurrection of Christ. Every Sunday is Easter for believers. And that's a way to help us keep our priorities right. Is to say Sunday's not Sunday, it's the Lord's Day. So what are we going to do today? This morning we looked at all the things in Nehemiah's life that he had to say no to. He is a great example of the principle. And I want you to not forget it. So let's say it together. Here we go. Let's read it together. It's going to come up on the screen. Here we go. Let's say it. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. The power to say no is the guardian of priorities. So there's one question I think all of us have to do, and that's this. What is one thing this week in my life where I need to say no? What is one thing in my life that I need to say no? There's 1,000 things you could apply, but I just want you to think about that. Where in your life do you need to say no? Where is someplace you go, I'm looking at my priorities in my life, what's important to me, and I've allowed this to interfere with my life. I need to say no to this. Maybe it's something with your kids where you need to say no. Maybe it's in your own personal life where you need to. And maybe it's going to happen this week. Maybe something's going to come up this week, and you're going to go, okay, what did that guy preach on? I don't remember. Oh, yeah, the power to say no is the guardian of priorities. Lord, give me the power to say no. Let's pray.